On? 1, 2, 3. There we go. Welcome. And I understand we started 10 seconds or so ago. My name is Jim Rader, sometimes known as James Rader. And if you look for me on the internet, my web address is a lot like my email address. My web address is my name, rader.org, O-R-G. My email just has my first name in front of that, jim@rader.org. So if you want to contact me with questions or want me to lecture to your group or whatever you want, that's how to get a hold of me the easy way. What I've been doing that makes me qualified to give you this little introduction is for 10 years I've been teaching genealogy in the classroom to adult ed students. And the fun part was teaching the beginners how to use a computer. Some of you haven't got past that point, and I would encourage you. The thing we discovered is spending time on the computer gets you past the fear of the computer. Once you get past the fear of the computer, you're off and running. I've been trying to understand DNA in depth by taking tests myself for the last 5 years and lecturing for over 5 years on DNA. So I've experienced all the things I'm telling you. I'm going to tell you my opinions and my experiences. I'm not affiliated with any company. I'm retired like many of you are. I do this for fun, if you can believe that. Normally I have the pleasure of interacting with the audience, but as you can see from the position I'm in up here with the bright lights in my eyes and the television camera live streaming this, I won't be able to take questions until after the 60 minutes is up. So if you'll hold your questions, that would be appreciated. Let's see what my next note tells me I'm supposed to talk about. Now, the family historians have many things they do with their genealogy, but genetics is a little different. So how do we make the two work? So what I'm going to introduce you to is the concepts of how you use DNA to do genealogy. What are the things we're measuring? How do we do it? How do you know what's working for you? How do you know it helps your genealogy? Again, what are we trying to accomplish with a DNA test? Why would you spend $200, $300, $400 or more on a test if you don't know what it's going to do for you? The first thing to know is DNA does not do some things. If you've been following the stories about Thomas Jefferson, did Thomas Jefferson father the children from his slave? There's one camp that are the Jefferson Old Time Association members that say, no, Thomas Jefferson would never do that. There's another camp that's used DNA and says, well, we've proven for sure a Jefferson male who would have been related to Thomas Jefferson did father those children. And then you add a genealogy to it. Where were they at the time the children were conceived? 2 of the children were when Thomas Jefferson and this slave were in France, cohabiting in the same apartment. And there were no other Jefferson males within an ocean continent away. And she had 2 children that had Jefferson Y-DNA. To me, that means he was the father. But it did not tell us, notice specifically, that Thomas Jefferson was the father of these children. It told us that Thomas Jefferson's DNA, which will show you how many places it could have come from besides Thomas, is in these children. It doesn't tell you your ancestor's name when you do a DNA test. It will point you to other people who have the same values that you have that have a common name. You may have that surname, they may not. It does not give you a date or a place of residence. So with a genealogist, why are we going to bother with it? Those are all the things we want to know, right? Let's go through a couple of the companies that offer products in this area as an introduction. I don't know how many of you have heard of the company on the screen now, Family Tree DNA. Bennett Greenspan, the owner of Family Tree DNA, or one of the co-owners, is a genealogist like we are. He had made a fortune selling out an internet company. He was home helping his wife put away the groceries. And he says, honey, your spices are not in alphabetic order. Let me fix that for you. She says, get out of here and go find something to do. And he started the company called Family Tree DNA because he had some relatives in South America. He thought genealogy sort of pointed to them being related, but he couldn't prove it with genealogy. And he'd heard about this DNA stuff. So his focus in this company is to develop tools for genealogists. You look at the goals and motivations of other companies and you might find other goals, but this is the only company that's a genealogy company that got into DNA. And that's all their purpose is DNA and genealogy. He has 3 kinds of tests, major kinds. The Family Finder is the name for the one that Ancestry calls the everything test. It tests all of your autosomes, and we'll go into detail on that. But in generalities, the scientific evidence for this test says that you have enough DNA in your body after 5 generations that we can still tell that you're related. But on that 6th generation, it gets pretty thin, and we can't tell if you're really related. So the scientists would tell you that it's only good for 5 generations. Now, if you listen to Ancestry Detective last hour, you'll hear how she went more than 5 generations routinely. But the science tells us 5 generations is the limit. The Y-DNA testing is the second type of test. It's the original, the gold standard, the one that really works to prove things to genealogists, and we'll show you how that works in a moment. The final test is the one that ladies take, and men. It's called mitochondrial DNA. But Family Tree DNA, again, has found that the tests that we've been offering in the past are not detailed enough to eliminate false matches. The other companies still haven't gotten there yet, but Family Tree DNA offers what they call a full sequence of the mtDNA. And we're hoping, this is new, 6 months old maybe, we're hoping that will make it possible for us to do female type mainline DNA with some reliability with DNA. So far with that mtDNA test that many of us took, I took the one with BYU a long time ago. Those tests didn't do us any good at all. Well, that test proved specifically and totally that I'm related to 50% of the women in Europe. Doesn't that help my genealogy? So we had to refine it and refine it and refine it. We hope we've got it now, because right now it is the whole thing. There's nothing more to measure until you start getting into active proteins and stuff. When you get to autosomal tests, you're going to get some funny numbers and things to look at. But the thing for you to understand from this slide is when you run one of these everything tests like Ancestry calls it, or Family Finder test, or whatever they call it, it's an autosomal test, you will get so many people that match you that you'll be overwhelmed. I have about 1,500 matches at Ancestry, the same at 23andMe, and the same at Family Tree DNA. So altogether, that's 4,500 people. Would you like to do some email work for me? And contact all 4,500 people and see if we're related. What we've done to help figure this out is the screen you'll see a report, part of a report, where we've taken those matches and sorted them down to where we have only the people that match each other. So it's just not people that I match, but of the people that match me, how many of them also match each other? So in this case, we have Lynette, Margaret, Lori, Carolyn, and David that all match me. But if you look in the box to the right, there's X's in between some of them. For example, Lynette and Margaret both have X's in their corresponding matching box, where Lynette and Margaret do not have X's in the column that says Lori. There would be 2 more columns if there was room to fit it on the slide, but there weren't. And if you look at Carolyn and David and Lori, they don't have any X's under Lynette or Margaret. So what I have is 2 sets of people. Lynette and Margaret match each other and match me, and Lori, Carolyn, and David match each other and match me. So it's 2 separate projects. So if I want to work on a project, I'll pick either the group of 3 or the group of 2 and say, okay, let's get together, folks. There's 3 of us that have something in common. We have a common ancestor, all 3 of us. Who is that ancestor? And DNA won't tell us. Genealogy has to tell us. Now let me give you an example of the one that's the gold standard, the one that everybody should use for serious genealogy work. It's called a STR test, which I'll explain further in a few minutes. and it's done by males. Only a male has a Y-DNA. And I'll show you how to get around that problem if you're a female. In my case, I had an immigrant ancestor whose name is up there on the board, Johann Kasper Rother, who came into colonial Pennsylvania, and he lived the rest of his life with German-speaking people in the German communities around the East Coast. Our genealogy tells us that this chart, which I put relationship confirmed across, has 3 of his sons and 3 of his sons, down to living people. So theoretically, since the Y chromosome goes from a father to his son, the 3 people at the bottom of that chart should have the same Y chromosome. Nothing complex about this, right? It's simple. Male to male to male. And this is the tool that will make you possible to prove your genealogy or disprove it. Many of us go in our genealogy straight back, and we don't pay enough attention to the other people that live in the same area with the same number, the same name, and we make mistakes. This will help you catch the mistakes and get you back on the right path. Okay, AncestryDNA in their newer tests is that this is what they tell you it will do for you. It'll break down your genetic ethnicity. We'll look at that in detail, how well it works for me. It'll give you new relatives matches in real time. What it's going to try to do is it tells you that you match somebody that's in their database, it's going to look at the 2 genealogies that are already on their database and find a person who you both have in each database. Sometimes you think, well, why don't they just do that without the DNA test? But they don't. It's a simple integration into your ancestry tree. It automatically updates as new results and scientific discoveries are made. In other words, let's say you and I, let's say everybody in this room takes the test today, and we don't match each other. And tomorrow somebody else comes along and takes the test. They make the effort to go back and compare that new test to all of us, and if anybody is matched, everybody gets notified that's matched. So you don't have to keep calling them back and say, do I have any new matches? They'll send you an email saying you have a new match. And this test works for both men and women. This is an ad they ran during the Christmas time where they had the product on sale. I understand it's on sale in their booth now. I didn't check the price, but it was $79 at Christmas time. One would hope it's $79 now. Is it? And you'll see it shows a couple of points. It says at the bottom, it's hard for me to read that print. There's 4 steps to doing this test. Number 1 is you order a kit, which they have over there on the counter. If you pay for it today, you can take it home with you and do the process. The second step in the process, you mail your kit back to them after you fill this vial that I'll show you in a minute with some of your spit. That's a lot of fun. Then expert analysts will analyze your results after 6 to 8 weeks, and then you'll get all kinds of reports and stuff on their website. All of the tests work pretty much like this. All of the companies mail you a kit. All of the companies get samples of your DNA. The difference is family tree DNA uses what looks like a straw you drink a milkshake out of with a piece of felt stuck in the end of it. And you rub the inside of your cheek. And they get skin samples off the inside of your cheek that way. It doesn't hurt, but it gets, I feel it's a more accurate test, but they've been doing it forever that way. AncestryDNA, when you get matches, you'll see a page like this on your website. And you notice it has a button there for hints. And if I hit the button for hints up there at the top, then I don't have that screen on here. It'll show you just people that it's found genealogies. In my case, I've got 1,500 matches and 4 people that have genealogies that have a person that we share. Not even have a person we share. When you find one that has a match, you can go to this page and it'll show you the actual genealogy. So the idea is great. If we can get more people to put their genealogy on Ancestry when they take the test, and get more people to take the test, this is the ideal way to do an autosomal test. Because you don't have to learn all that other stuff I was just showing you a minute ago with who matches who and all that sort of stuff. 23andMe. How many of you heard of the company 23andMe? They're the company that's been talked to by the FDA lately and says you cannot give medical advice anymore. Their test was primarily, they wanted to build a database of people who would fill out questionnaires so people doing scientific research on DNA could have a ready pool of candidates whose DNA had already been tested and people who would be willing to answer surveys to help these studies move forward. In addition, they added genealogy support. And that sort of came slowly at the beginning. It's much better now, the genealogy support. But since the FDA told them they can't do the first part of their goals, while they're working out the legal problems, they're just an ancestry company right now. They do some things, well, they do a lot of things different than Ancestry does, because Ancestry has this big database of family trees. 23andMe doesn't. 23andMe does it the way the other companies do, that thing I described with people that group in the same place to have common ancestors. So they have a lot of tools like that. And they've added this new thing, Neanderthal. You know, you women have all said your husbands are Neanderthals. Well, now you can prove it. When you do a test with 23andMe or Family Tree DNA, you have a tool called a chromosome browser. And if you notice this chart, it has 23 rows. And in some of the places it has blue, some of the places it has gray, and other places it has black, or at other places it's blank. Blue, it means half of your DNA matches. Black, it means all of your DNA at that location matches. And blank means it didn't match at all. So a human has 23 chromosomes, that's why there's 23 lines. And then at the bottom there's a place for the X chromosome, which all of us have one. So you can look at this visually and see this is specifically between me and one of my granddaughters. So you can see how close. And we generally say you get half of your DNA from your parents, and if you continue that on to the next generation, they would have half of that generation, which make it a quarter, right? Well, my granddaughters, one has 23% of mine, the other one has 28%. So that science is an approximation, half and a quarter. Now, will the test tell us who we are related to? Well, the obvious answer is only if the other person took the test also. It's not going to find people who have not taken the test. And the ideal thing that this is sort of leading up to, if you really want to get results, like my example with people that were in genealogies that were not real tight, you bring your own candidates into tests right away and they'll tell you. Or if you do it the other way, you can take the test. Let's say you thought you were a member of a certain Smith family. And at Family Tree DNA, they have family studies by surname. So you are a Smith, so you take the test under Smiths, and it comes back and shows you all the different groups of Smiths by major category, and shows you which group you're in, or which group you're not in. Maybe you're not even a Smith. Now, how do they work? We have a problem, so to speak, with the term race and ethnicity. As we've gotten more biology, we find those terms are not easy to point out in biology. There isn't a race gene. There isn't, an Italian doesn't have a different gene than a German. We all have the same sort of genes. We have a very high percentage of exactly the same. Further, the tests are trying to show you where your family lived. And in the beginning, it was just for anthropological time, the time before surnames, way back. And of course, genealogists, that's interesting. It doesn't do you any good for your genealogy. And they're also trying to show how related you are to one another. When you take a DNA test, there are several things on your DNA you could measure. And I'm not going to try to teach you biology because I don't understand it fully. And as the biology moves forward, the science is moving so fast, they're discovering new things every day. The things they can test keep changing. There are two major ways to measure today, and who knows how we're going to do it tomorrow, but let's show you how all this works. But first, let's show you how to do a DNA test. On the right side is that straw I was talking about with a piece of felt in it that Family Tree DNA uses. They send that out to you and they say, take that and rub the inside of your cheek for 30 seconds. Then you'll notice at the bottom of the straw there's a smaller section, smaller diameter. If you push on that, it'll eject a piece of felt out of the end. So you hold that over a little tube they give you and eject it into the tube, screw the cap on the tube, and mail it back. They actually give you 2 of those until you use one on one side and one on the other side. The one on the left is the one Ancestry and 23andMe are using. And this one, you open that big cap on top, which is open already on this picture, and you spit in that cap until you fill the tube up to the black line, which is quite a challenge. After you do that, you close the lid. It allows some liquid to go down into it to preserve it. Then you unscrew the top part and screw the cap on, and you got the same sort of thing you're mailing back into the lab. All the companies do the same thing when they get this back. They take the thing you sent them and isolate your DNA from it and make the DNA replicate, so they got a whole lot to measure. And if you wanted some science, you can look up the subject of DNA. There's 4 sugars that are involved in how DNA works in the biology. There's all kinds of courses on the internet you can take free that'll go into this for, well, the one I took not too long ago was 26 weeks of 4 hours per lesson, trying to figure out what DNA is. So if you really want to get into it, it's all free. The DNA has chromosomes in it, and that's what this picture is trying to show. And here's a picture from an electron microscope of actual chromosomes. And they're numbered in relationship to their length. Number 1 being the longest one, and number 22 being the shortest one, and the sex chromosomes being the last 2. When we do DNA tests, what they call the DNA everything test, usually tests at least 1 through 22. The newer ones now are testing everything, the X and the Y, or the 2 X's if it's a female. The other thing we measure is called mtDNA. If you can see those orange things that look like aspirin pills or Tylenol, that's a picture of a cell cut in half so you can see the nucleus, and you can see the area outside the nucleus is still within the cell. And these guys float around in that area, and they provide energy to the cell so it functions. So it's not your DNA, it's a parasite, but it actually is a DNA that's passed from your mother to you. So when we measure errors and size, that's what we're measuring, errors and size. And I'll tell you exactly what those are in just a second. So when do we get errors? When a female body is creating an egg, there's a process which they go through to divide their 2 strands of DNA into 1 and put it in the egg. So if a female creates 2 eggs, she could very easily put 1 strand in one egg and the other strand in another egg. But she also mixes things. So she'll have 2 chromosome number 1s, one from her mother and one from her father. Those can be mixed together and pieces and parts put in the egg. So the egg now has a new chromosome number 1 that the female does not have. She has pieces of it, but she doesn't have it all put together like that. So during that process, errors can occur. Likewise, the male, when he creates sperm, he has to unwind his DNA and pull out one side and put it in the egg. So that's when mistakes happen. And those mistakes are called SNPs, which we'll get into in a second. When we do a DNA test, we're going to measure either those errors, or we're going to do another measurement that tries to describe how thick, how big, how much DNA you have at a certain location. And that's called a STR. On the bottom of this slide, if you can pronounce those words quickly, you're better than I am. Short tandem repeats are not hard to say, but single nucleotide polymorphisms is a tongue twister for me. So let's look at the STR measurements first. That's the one we've been using the most for the longest. That's the one the Y chromosome has been using for the longest time. They now are measuring it with both methods. This is looking at a particular place in a person's Y chromosome. The 4 rows are 4 different people. One person at that location has 3 repeats of those 4 basic chemicals we talked about. Another person has 4, another one has 5, another one has 6. You can have all kinds of numbers. But when you compare those 4 people, you can see they're not the same. So even on that one location on your DNA, you can quickly determine whether you're not related. So if you don't match within a fairly close amount to another person, you're not related. If you do match, you are related, maybe. We found over time it takes a whole lot more than one place to be confident that you're truly related. Here's an example of a readout of a chart from a DNA test. The labels across the top are the names of the locations where they took the test, where they did the measuring. The rows across the screen are 4 different people's tests. So you can see the people had repeats in the upper left-hand corner under location DYS 393. The first person had 14 repeats at that location. Also, the second and third person also had 14, but the fourth person had 15. Can you see that? This is all you have to do to interpret a DNA test. You look at this chart. If they're the same, how close to the same? That's how close you're related. If they're not the same, you're not related. Everybody got that? Everybody still awake? The other way to do this is we'll look for those errors, what we call a SNP. And a SNP, when you look at the 4 chemicals, that's what these letters stand for. The A, T, C, and G are the shorthand for the 4 chemicals. You can see on the top row there's an A, T in blue, C, G, T. And the row right below that has a C where there was a T. That's a mistake. And down below on the same screen you can see where the C was, there's nothing in the lower row. So both of those are examples of one kind of an error where something is left out or changed. This one's showing a substitute where there was one C, there's now 2 C's. And here's one where there's a G instead of the C. So wherever there's a mistake in copying, that creates what we call a SNP. The average human has around 15,000 of these errors in their DNA. So let's say, for example, you and your wife were creating a child, and one of these errors occurred someplace in the process. And your child has a new error that you don't have. If you do this test and compare yourself to the child, you would not match. But all of your descendants from that child on will have that error. It'll be passed on. So you can, with SNPs, we can actually almost figure out when in time things happened based on which person has it, which group of people have it. So if you look at your tree and do different levels, you can figure out where in order the people fall in the tree. There's another company called Britain's DNA that's interesting to play with also. They focus on figuring out where within Britain your people were or occur most often. This is their printout screen with a whole lot of results on it. Here's my results. The top part, which has about 8 rows of letters, you can see a letter, some numbers, and a plus or a minus. The plus means, yes, I have that mistake. The minus means, no, we tested for it and you don't have that mistake. So those are the errors that that particular test knew that I have. And with that information, they classified me as this big long thing over at the left, which is called a haplogroup, R1b1, which is the most common European haplogroup there is. All the letters after that try to narrow it down to which part of the group I belong to. Down at the bottom, the black line going across with the red dots in it, those are what you'll see on the National Geographic test. National Geographic has a company called National Geographic that also offers DNA tests. And the bottom, see below that where it says 75K and 20K? That's how many thousand years ago that error occurred. So the one that's 20K is the last one they know where it occurred by finding mummified remains or skeletons where they could do a DNA test, a Y-DNA test. So this DNA test tells me for sure where people with my Y chromosome lived 20,000 years ago, because there's somebody buried there. Does that help you with your genealogy much? No, that's called anthropology, right? This is the one we looked at a minute ago. There's another one like it. Let's look at the percentage of DNA you get, because you need this to sort of understand how closely related people are. If you look at this, you'll notice up at the top, a mother, father, and siblings share 50%. And there's a new number there that we haven't talked about, a centimorgan. This is a new measurement biologists have developed to measure how long of DNA you have. So 3,400 centimorgans of DNA in common. If you move to the next generation where you're talking about your grandparents, your half-siblings, your double first cousins, we're down to 25%. Remember, I showed my granddaughters, one was 23% and one was 28%. So these are approximations. Then we go to 12%, 6.5%, and by the time we get down to the third cousins once removed, we've got less than 1%, less than 1/3 of 1%. So you can see why we say the test, this is what you get when you deal with an autosomal test. How closely related am I? Well, what percentage of DNA do I share? Okay, let's talk in detail how you use a Y chromosome test to do genealogy. If you look at this chart, this is one of those 3D, have you played with a family chart maker program that's called 3D charting? You can spin your family tree any way you want it to make it fit on the page. That's what I did here. And this is showing at the top of the screen there's a blue, and they call it red, I call it pink, a male and a female. The female's in pink, the male's in blue. And they had some children, and on the right-hand side, you can see Reuben H. Rader, if you could read the fine print, married Frances Hughes. So according to our rule of Y-DNA, Reuben Rader's sons will all have his Y-DNA. His daughters will not have his Y-DNA, because if a female had Y-DNA, she'd be a male. So if you look at this, and you look at the next row down, you see that Reuben and Martha had 3 children, you can see here. Raymond, and you can't even read I can't even read the name on the other 2, but you can see there's 2 blues and 1 pink. So the 2 blues did receive the Y chromosome, the pink did not. So if you look at the next generation down where there would be grandchildren, you can see the blue daughter had 2 sons. They have a Y chromosome, but they don't have her father's Y chromosome, they have her husband's Y chromosome. Because remember, the Y chromosome goes from male to male to male. So when you're looking at your genealogy chart, you look at a path that's straight male descendancy, and that's where you know the Y chromosome should be the same. Here's another example of the same thing, and let's move to the next one. We're trying to emphasize that point. Who gets the Y chromosome? All direct line descendant males have the same Y chromosome. So like back with Thomas Jefferson, if you go back to Thomas Jefferson's great-grandfather, all direct males coming down from him would have the same Y chromosome exactly, minus a few mistakes. So if we look at this chart, this is a genealogy chart, and it starts in 1660 with a male. And he had a son who had a son all the way down to 1960. So that's a direct line of males, right? So according to our rule, they all have the same Y chromosome. If we add other people into this chart, let's look at the bottom and add another child. That father from 1930 birth had 2 sons. Both sons get the same Y chromosome. Let's go back up another generation. The grandfather had 2 sons, and one son had 2 sons, the other son had 1. So the grandfather's grandchildren, 3 sons, all have the grandfather's Y chromosome exactly. And same with the great-grandfather, and all the way down. So people will tell me, I can't find anybody to test for a Y chromosome because there are no males in this generation. I say, okay, you're in 1960, let's go back up to 1835 and find all the descendant sons from that guy who was alive in 1835. I'll bet you'll find somebody to test there. And you've heard that, if you've been to some of the lectures I've been to, you've heard the term reverse genealogy or forward genealogy. That's what you do when you go to somebody in your genealogy, and instead of going back in time, you go forward in time. Your goal is to find several things. What would you find if you get your cousin out here on the far right-hand edge besides Y chromosome? Who's got the family keepsakes? Who's got that family Bible you've been looking for? You'll probably find it with a daughter, because sons don't generally want a family Bible. But once you get to these families of living people, you have a lot of other things to find besides just the DNA. So as a genealogist, if you want to build up your genealogy, widen out your tree, bring it forward, find more living cousins. And that'll also give you the place to get your DNA samples to do more proving that your genealogy is right. Or if you're questioning, help you find out where you're incorrect. Okay, now let's talk about the companies that want to sell you business. We've been talking about them a little bit already, and we're halfway through our hour. At this point, I'd normally like to have a whole lot of questions, but since we've got a television audience, we won't do that until later. Okay, what are the companies offering you? One of the things you hear often is they will tell you where your family came from and when. National Geographic projects, Genographic project says that. Ancestry's Everything test, which is their genetic ethnicity. 23andMe, Family Tree DNA. Even Britain's DNA is showing you, will tell you where within Britain that your Britain ancestors came from. The first people to do this were AncestryDNA, and they used reference populations from the science community with family tree DNA. I'm reading Ancestry and thinking other. Ancestry did the same thing when they started up a couple of years ago. But then they bought out a project many of us know about. BYU DNA project was taken over by the Sorensen Molecular Project when there was a problem. The Sorensen Molecular Project, the owner of Sorensen Molecular died, and his heirs sold out that product to Ancestry. Now Ancestry's figured out, wait a minute, we've got DNA tests and we got 4-generation pedigree charts. But all those DNA tests were done with an old method that's not compatible with what we're doing now. So let's take all those DNA samples, rerun the test to get new sample results, and use the 4-generation pedigree charts to add to our family trees already, so we can show people who they match to. And those are the things that Ancestry's new matching, they just changed, I'll show you the date in a minute, to that type of matching. We'll show you what it did to things too. 23andMe, the company that started out doing medical stuff, their goal was to tell you where your family lived 10,000 years ago. Again, not real helpful for genealogy. Family Tree DNA, remember the company that started all this, they are doing likewise. The Genographic project had a Genographic project 1.0 back in 2005, and they now have 2.0, and they're about to have another version of that, I believe. And they said they hope to tell you hundreds of thousands of years. And just as an aside, their goal of their first project was to go around the planet and get DNA samples from all indigenous peoples on the planet. And their goal was to figure out what kind of DNA each tribe had. They've never published that result. It was supposed to be a 4-year study. It's been about 10, more than 10 now? 8. The people I talked to that have looked at some of the samples, they say there's so much diversity in each Indian tribe, they don't know how you'd figure out which of the many DNAs that are in a particular tribe are the tribe's DNA. It seems like we people have been moving around and fraternizing a lot forever. Now here's an example of my results from these type tests. Family Tree DNA, the top one I listed, says I'm 87% of what they call Western European, and the samples they have for Western European are French, Orcadian, and Spanish. There weren't many tests in Europe to even talk about to compare to. And the other part of me, 12%, is European of the Tuscan, Finnish, Romanian, Sardinian type. Then AncestryDNA's old way of doing it, before they brought in the Sorensen Molecular Project, said I was 62% Central European and 38% Scandinavian. The Genographic project likes 42% Northern European and 39% Mediterranean, and 23andMe says 66% European 18% British, and 2% French. So you look at them all together, they're sort of all over the map, right? But in general, there's a lot of European in there. Now let's look and see what Ancestry's new results say. I'm all of a sudden 85% British. Now what good does that do me? I thought, well, maybe they know something the rest of them don't do. So I said that Britain's DNA is offering a company that will tell me where in Britain my British ancestry comes from. So I had that test done recently, got the results back about a month ago, and it proves without a doubt that my DNA comes from Spain. So this is a good entertaining parlor tool right now for entertainment. It's very much an alpha or beta test. It's not something you could use for genealogy to say, okay, it says I came from here, I'm going to go look for records from this location. So as a genealogist, I would not take a DNA test trying to figure out where my family came from or what ethnicity I had. And if you get into the other, it just goes on and on, the problems we're having with this right now. Okay, there's a company called African Ancestry. This is Dr. Kittles. And he's been trying to figure out, he's an African American himself, where did their African ancestry come from? And he's been offering tests of varying degrees of technology as the technologies move forward. And he's saying he uses particular markers that will inform you of your ancestry. And he's doing the Y chromosome and mtDNA and autosomal now. So he's using all three kinds. And it's arguable, I think they're getting better. But there's a lot of debate of whether it's accurate. He has a DNA mix test he's offering today. And this is the parts of Africa. The green parts are where he has samples from today he can try to compare you to. But remember my example from National Geographic. They went to individual tribes in very obscure places on the planet, and they couldn't, when they sampled all the DNA in the tribe, they couldn't find one DNA that was representative for the tribe. So now Dr. Kittles has gone out there and he's taken samples, but he didn't take anywhere near as many samples. But he feels that he has samples that are representative for that tribe, so he can say, if you have that DNA, you come from that tribe. AncestryDNA, we've talked about a little bit so far, right? Everybody knows about Ancestry.com. AncestryDNA's had several incarnations. They tried for the longest time to contract out this sort of work, rather than building it in-house. I can't remember exactly when, but a couple of years ago they started the AncestryDNA sub-part of their corporation. They put, if I understand right, $5 million to start up this corporation to try to figure out how to do this right and how to make it so people don't have to learn any biology to do their DNA. I love their goals. I hope they get there. They're just not there yet. This is their regions that they have identified for African ancestry, trying to do sort of what Dr. Kittles is doing to help people with African ancestry figure out which part of Africa their ancestry comes from. And we looked at some of these reports a minute ago. This one's showing with the matches highlighted, so the shaky leaf part. Here's my results from AncestryDNA's tests. I have 82 matches that have 95 to 96% confidence level, 490 that are moderate, 1,004 that are low, and 4,519 matches that are very low. Who wants a job to contact the 4,915? But in their goal to show me genealogy, shaky leaves, they've got 6. So we got a long ways to go before the goal is achieved. And this is this the British one? No, this is before the change. This map that shows the blue circles where they said my family came before the change. And that's a chart you've already seen. 23andMe we talked about a little bit. They're showing us Neanderthal ancestry. Now if you remember our percentages as we went down from father to grandfather, after about 5 generations we had less than 1%. How many generations back were the Neanderthals alive? A whole lot more than 5 generations, right? And they're showing that I have 2.6% Neanderthal. To get 2.6 from my normal relatives, it could only be 4 generations back. And as far as I know, in my 4th generation, there were no Neanderthals. So I'm still not understanding what they're trying to tell me here, but it's another fun part of the trick. These reports are all reports they show you to try to visually show you your percentage of ethnicity. And this is one that's trying to show you how many you have matching with how much accuracy. 23andMe also has this, it's sort of a worksheet type page. It shows you how you relate, who the person is, what sort of things they've done in testing, and then a link to contact that person. And again, this is that chromosome browser we're talking about. Here's a good one where you can see a lot more black. Me and my brother and I have 50%, almost exactly. And the black spots are where we have exactly both chromosomes, both pairs of our DNA are the same. The blue spots are the parts where we only have one side the same. We either got it from mom or dad, but we didn't both get the same thing. Family tree DNA. What's unique about family tree DNA? They're the company that started all this mess. Remember Bennett Greenspan? He was trying to alphabetize his wife's spices. He's the genealogist that got going with this stuff, working with the college people and getting DNA tested. You wouldn't believe their lab in Houston, Texas today. It was amazing to me that the newer tests, they put the DNA in the test for 23 people. Maybe it's more, I don't remember the exact number of people, and they turn on the computer and it runs for about a month, and after a month it puts out the reports. Can you imagine how much computer work's going on? The big data problem as we talk about it. Think about matching. These tests we're talking about, these new autosomal tests, have 700,000 data points. So when I'm trying to figure out if I related to you, they look at my 700,000 data points and see, do they match this guy's 700,000 data points? But they've got 400,000, how many they got in their database? 4,000. I forget the numbers. I'm lost. We're trying to get to 1 million. They got 400,000, yeah. Got 400,000 people roughly that are tested. So you're going to take 400,000 people, each having 700,000 data points, and match them against this new guy's 700,000 data points. Can you imagine how much computer space that takes? So family tree DNA has this kind of reporting system, and it has a bunch of data it will report to you that you don't really need to worry about at this moment. The chromosome browser allows you to pick 3 or 4 people. Say, okay, there's 4 people that say they match me. Can we put them all on one chart? That's what the colors are for. The pink shows which chromosome I match with, what's that guy's name? Bob Fish. And the blue shows how much Robert Stanley. So you can see we each have matching DNA, but in different locations on different chromosomes. That's what those rows are. That's chromosome 1 through 6. I just cut off to make it fit on the slide. And you can also get that data in a tabular form if you'd like. Now, if I was guessing right, we'd be all done. But according to my clock, I got 12 minutes to go. That's good. We can do more. Just to give you how much there is to really learn on this. If you really want to get into this, I'm doing one for the African American Genealogy Group in Sacramento when I go back in about a month. And I'm doing 4 hours, and I can't fit all the material in. So right here I've got 136 slides, and we just did, what, 40? Can't see the number on that one. 85. We've done pretty good. So we'll go for a few more minutes. See what we want to talk about. Okay, here's some good stuff. The companies are always coming up with something else to test. Why does a company do that? Companies are in business to sell products, right? Some of the products are good for genealogy. What I've learned over the last 10 years of doing DNA tests, when a test comes out, the companies will tell you what the scientists told them. This test is going to prove X. Then they get us genealogists to run the tests. And we compare them to our genealogy database, and we go back to them and say, no, it didn't prove X, it proved Y. So now they know what the test really does. So they're always coming up with new things they can test and give us more information. We used to be excited when we could get 37 data points. Now we're upset if they don't give us over 1 million data points. And these, like this big Y test that's just come out from Family Tree DNA, it measures 10 million data points. And there's a Walk the Y that's 420,000. There's another one called Full Genomes that's 14 million. So just so you're aware as a consumer, you don't necessarily want to take the latest and greatest and most hyped test, which right now is the everything test like Ancestry talks about. One of these days we'll figure out how to use that everything test in our genealogy. One of the things we have figured out is we can use it real well for adoptees' current stuff. Like there's a database of all the people that are half siblings that were from the same sperm donor. One of those college boys knew that they were going to be on a database someday, and if they ever find a living true child of that sperm donor, all of a sudden that database will have daddy's name. And all sorts of things like that. Adoption. Adoptees are finding it very handy. It's very easy to find your natural parents with an everything test. A challenge we have today with our DNA tests, and you're going to come across this right away, when you run your test at one place, then run it at a different place, they may not have the same nomenclature, the same labels for things. So you might want to compare what you did with company A to company B. And the three big ones, Ancestry, 23andMe, and Family Tree DNA, are using the same naming conventions, but Britain's DNA has a whole different naming convention for theirs. We're having problems figuring out when these tests determine a mistake in your DNA and a company labels it as mistake number so-and-so, is it really mistake number so-and-so, or is it the one right next to it? So the science isn't quite there yet that they can specifically be very comfortable with their naming, and there's other tests that we can have run later that will refine a particular place if we want to make sure of something. So what are we hoping for in the future? All of the companies are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to find a way with DNA to tell us how we're related, to determine our heritage. And whether you use ethnicity, which seems to be becoming more of a social construct than a biological thing, societies name ethnic groups, and not necessarily all use the same naming convention, and the definition of a particular ethnic group is not uniform. They don't know whether this super everything test like Ancestry is offering will do what we need it to do. There's a lot of other things your DNA does that they could test for. Now, Britain's DNA is a good example for you to get your consumer skills sharpened up. Now, what I've told you before, they're offering these three tests, among others. They got one called the Fatherline Y Standard Test, another one called the Fatherline Chromo 2 Test, and another one called All My Ancestry Chromo 2. Now, with some researching, you can figure out the All My Ancestry is testing mtDNA, Y-DNA, and the autosomes. The other two that say Y are just testing the Y chromosome. So if you want to take a test from them, and you're a female, and they send you a test kit, you send it back, they're likely to find no Y chromosome. Notice I didn't say they'll definitely find that. We've also discovered that about 5% of the females alive today have their father's Y chromosome. They don't have male genitalia, but generally they're larger structured women, and they find it difficult to get pregnant. So if you're really a genealogist and really want your father's Y chromosome and you're one of those women, take a Y test and see if you have one. And this is one of Britain DNA's reports where they show the 4 kinds of British DNA. I hesitate to even get into this part, but we got 5 minutes to go. Let's go for it. One of the things we're doing on almost all of these tests, after you get done with the test and they tell you what they think about the test with their reports, you can download the raw results that came out of the computer, the 700,000 data points or the 10 million data points. And there are third-party people, most of them volunteers like you and I, that have a website where you can take your raw results from Family Tree DNA, Ancestry, all the different companies, and load them into the same database and compare the tests from each company, first to see if there's any differences, but you can also compare them to other people, and they're also developing other tools to help you interpret what the DNA test actually said, beyond the things that the big companies were comfortable telling you. Another company that's out there called Full Genomes, and they only want $1,500 for this test. The price of doing a real full genome test should be down to $1,000 this year. The prices for these tests, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Moore's Law and how the price of computers has dropped and the speed of computers has increased. Well, you draw a chart with Moore's Law on it, and then you draw the chart with the price per point on DNA, and the DNA is dropping in price just astronomically faster than Moore's Law. So our full testing of your full DNA will be available in under $1,000 real soon. This company, it says they're doing a complete, comprehensive DNA test, but you notice what it says on this screen, buyer beware. What does it say they're actually doing? They're testing the complete Y-DNA, not the chromosomes. So they aren't testing the autosomes, they aren't testing the X chromosome, they're just testing the Y chromosome. And other companies, that big Y and the other ones, are doing closer to what this company's offering, and for $500 to $300. Let's wrap up with this. We got a couple of minutes, I think. I don't see anybody waving hands or telling me we're about done. There's somebody with a hand. How much time do we have?
Oh, I don't know. I just have a question.
Oh, you have a question. Well, let's go a few more minutes till the director tells me the camera's done, and we'll do questions. The first thing you need to know as a genealogist is what I just tried to explain to you. Now, some of it probably went over your head, but the nice thing about this lecture, it's being recorded. You can go home and watch it anytime you want. And maybe some of what I said the first time didn't make sense, but it will watching it a second time. But really, all that you need to know to take a DNA test is in what I talked about. And primarily the thing you're going to be testing is a Y chromosome. You're going to go out and do reverse genealogy on each of your surnames. How many surnames do you have in your family tree? I can do the Y chromosome test for my male line straight up, but I still have, 16 great-great-grandparents or something like that? I've got to find 15 other people to test for the other Y chromosomes to prove I got that right. Are we right? This is a fun set of slides in that it shows you how to tell how closely related you are if you do the Y-DNA test I'm talking about. And I call the gold standard in Y-DNA the 37 marker. And by the way, I just checked with Ancestry before I came over here. They're still offering the Y-DNA test they've been offering for some time that's 46 markers, and they haven't updated the pricing. It's a little dated. It needs to be reviewed by the marketing people. It's too high a price for that few markers. So I would recommend, the only company I know for sure that's offering a Y-DNA test today is Family Tree DNA. So if you have 37 of the 37 places you looked at, you're looking at 37 locations on the DNA, and all of them are the same. You're very tightly related. On the example I showed you for my Rader descendancy, that's what we got, 37 out of 37. If we go to 36, notice we added a descriptive term. We're tightly related now. 35, we're just related now. 34, we're still related. 33, well, we're probably related. 32, possibly related. 31, no sale, you're not related. And it's that simple when you look at your results on your Y-DNA. That chart's on their website and every place you look. And I can, in my case, when I test with my brother, I get 37 out of 37. When I test with other people on that Rater DNA chart we tried, we get 37 out of 37. And it's very unusual. It makes me think my Y-DNA doesn't change as fast as some other people's. The other thing to know about a Y-DNA test is you can do what's called a surname study, as we mentioned earlier. Family Tree DNA has surname studies where you actually get a discount on the price of the test. And whatever surname you're studying, you sign up under that surname study and you get two things. You get a little discount and you get a volunteer who's running the group that will coordinate and help you understand what your results are. Well, we're wrapping up, or we already wrapped up. Thank you to the television audience. And now we can take questions. And the problem we're going to have is, I think, is there another presentation coming on in here next, isn't there? Is there another one? So I'll get off the stage and we'll go back to the back. If anybody wants to ask questions, I'll be around as long as you've got questions. Thank you very much for coming. I hope I helped you.